The Real Cost of Pleasure in a Concealed World, Aldous Huxley. What if pleasure isn't a gift, but a trap? What if the very things that make us feel alive are the same things quietly numbing our minds, eroding our freedom, and reshaping our souls? Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, warned us about a future where people wouldn't need to be controlled by force, because they'd be willingly sedated by comfort, entertainment, and instant gratification. That future is now. And the price we're paying for it is far greater than we realize. If you've ever felt that modern pleasure leaves you strangely empty, this video is for you. Let's explore the concealed mechanisms behind our desires, and why true freedom begins where artificial pleasure ends. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. It helps us spread ideas that challenge the system and awaken the mind. Topic 1. The Pleasure Trap: How Comfort Became Control. Pleasure was once a reward, a rare indulgence earned through effort, hardship, and patience. But in the modern world, it has become an omnipresent companion, a constant whisper that seduces us with convenience and ease. We live in a culture where struggle is demonized and comfort is idolized. Yet beneath the surface, this obsession with pleasure has become a tool for control, not liberation. Huxley predicted that society would be controlled not by pain, but by pleasure. His dystopia wasn't fueled by tyranny, but by indulgence. In Brave New World, people are pacified by endless entertainment, chemical pleasures, and mindless distractions. They believe they are free, but they are simply too sedated to notice the chains. Modern pleasure operates like a soft prison. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't restrict, it seduces. We don't feel oppressed, we feel entertained, distracted, comfortable. But that comfort comes with a hidden cost: the erosion of critical thought, the dulling of our instincts, and the atrophy of our willpower. The human mind craves stimulation, but not all stimulation is nourishment. Fast food, digital scrolling, pornographic content, synthetic dopamine hits. They all offer immediate satisfaction but leave the soul starving. Our nervous system becomes hijacked, addicted not to happiness, but to the sensation of pleasure itself. This is the trap. When pleasure becomes habitual, it no longer enriches, it enslaves. What begins as delight ends in dependence. What starts as enjoyment turns into necessity. We become prisoners of our cravings, unable to sit in silence, unable to face boredom, unable to connect without a screen. And society loves it that way. The more we chase pleasure, the easier we are to manipulate. The more distracted we are, the less we question. A population seeking constant entertainment doesn't demand meaning. It demands the next hit, the next trend, the next sensation. In this trap, even rebellion is commodified. We are sold freedom in branded products, individuality through algorithmic feeds, and happiness in chemical form. But these are illusions, beautiful cages that feel good enough to keep us from asking what lies beyond them. Huxley's vision wasn't about external oppression. It was about internal surrender. People would stop thinking not because they were forbidden to, but because they no longer wanted to. When desire replaces reflection, and comfort replaces courage, society collapses quietly, without resistance. Comfort isn't evil in itself, but comfort without consciousness becomes poison. When we stop challenging ourselves, when we numb every uncomfortable emotion, we also numb our capacity to evolve. Growth requires discomfort, but pleasure tells us to avoid it at all costs. A culture obsessed with pleasure cannot produce depth. Art becomes shallow. Conversations become superficial. Relationships become transactional. Spirituality becomes a trend. Everything is optimized for instant gratification, not inner transformation. Even our identities are shaped by this trap. Who we are becomes defined by what we consume, our playlists, our shows, our brands. We no longer ask, "Who am I becoming?" but rather, "What do I want to feel next?" And this addiction to feeling good makes us forget the value of becoming better. The pursuit of pleasure should be a momentary joy, not a lifelong obsession. But the system wants you to stay distracted, dependent, and docile. That's how power maintains itself without lifting a finger. Behind every seemingly innocent pleasure lies a potential mechanism of submission. Not because pleasure is inherently wrong, but because it's being weaponized against our ability to think, reflect, and resist. When society teaches you to chase what feels good rather than what is good, it disconnects you from purpose. You become a consumer, not a creator. A follower, not a thinker. A body, not a soul. So the question is not whether pleasure is bad, but whether it is yours. Are you choosing it? Or is it choosing you? Are you conscious of your cravings? Or have they replaced your consciousness? Huxley didn't want to destroy pleasure. He wanted us to wake up from its hypnotic grip, to reawaken the power of discomfort, silence, discipline, and contemplation, things that no longer sell well in the pleasure economy. The first step toward freedom is not rejecting pleasure, but understanding it, dissecting it, reclaiming it from the hands of those who use it to control us. Only then can we experience true joy, not the synthetic thrill, but the deep, slow-burning fire of meaning. Pleasure should amplify life, not anesthetize it. It should be a chapter in our story, not the entire book. And until we learn to choose pleasure consciously, we remain inside the trap, smiling, entertained, and silently enslaved. Topic 2. The illusion of freedom in a stimulus-driven society. Freedom in the modern world is one of the most seductive illusions. We are told we are free because we can choose between brands, swipe through dating profiles, and curate our playlist. But these are not choices, they are distractions. The real freedom lies not in what you consume, but in whether you can stop consuming. Huxley warned us of a world where freedom would be mistaken for indulgence, where people would believe they are liberated while being quietly domesticated by an avalanche of stimuli, where the ability to scroll endlessly is confused with autonomy, and the ability to say anything online is mistaken for true voice. Our environment is no longer a neutral space. It's a battlefield for your attention. Every sound, color, notification, and ad is designed not to inform, but to trigger. We don't think anymore, we react. We don't explore ideas, we scan headlines. We don't sit in stillness, we crave stimulation. In such a society, silence becomes unbearable. Disconnection feels like death. Boredom is seen as a flaw rather than an opportunity. And so we drown in noise, filling every void with content, numbing every emotion with distraction. Freedom requires distance from impulse, but our world is structured to amplify impulse and silence reflection. You are not free if you are constantly responding to external stimuli. You are a puppet moved by strings you can't even see. The illusion grows deeper when we believe we are choosing these stimuli. But most of what we engage with is algorithmically fed to us. The music you listen to, the videos you watch, the ideas you consider, they are all curated to maintain a feedback loop that keeps you dependent. And here's the cruel irony. The more choices you have, the more imprisoned you become by them. Decision fatigue, anxiety, overwhelm, all symptoms of a world with too much noise and too little wisdom. True freedom isn't having infinite options, it's knowing which ones matter. Huxley's brilliance was in showing us that slavery doesn't always come with chains. Sometimes it comes with comfort, dopamine, and endless options that lead nowhere. A wheel that spins but never moves forward. The human spirit was not designed for constant stimulation. It needs space, silence, and slowness. But those qualities are now labeled as laziness or inefficiency. Rest is demonized, contemplation is dismissed, solitude is pathologized. In a stimulus-driven society, attention becomes your most sacred currency. What you focus on shapes your inner world. And yet, we give our attention away freely, to trends, to noise, to shallow content that leaves no trace in the soul. We are free only when we can say no. No to the noise. No to the addiction. No to artificial emotions. No to the machine of endless stimuli. Until then, freedom is just a word, one that sounds good but means nothing. Technology was meant to empower us, but it has quietly disempowered our minds. We outsource memory, thinking, and even desire. We don't explore life anymore, we consume it in fragments, filtered through screens and sedated by design. To be free is to reclaim your inner space, to guard your consciousness from the invasion of manufactured pleasure, to choose what you feel, what you think, and how you spend your precious life force. But most people don't even know they've lost it. They walk through life half awake, comforted by convenience, distracted by novelty, and enslaved by pleasure masquerading as freedom. Huxley's message is not about rejecting the world, but reclaiming your agency within it, to awaken the quiet fire of self-awareness that refuses to be extinguished by superficial stimulation. Freedom is not given, it is remembered. It's a return to stillness, to depth, to presence. And in a world obsessed with speed and sensation, that return is the most radical act of all. Topic 3. The psychological decay behind instant gratification. Instant gratification is not merely a behavioral pattern, it's a psychological disease of the modern age. We are conditioned to expect everything now: entertainment, answers, validation, pleasure. The delay between desire and satisfaction has almost vanished. But what disappears with it is something far more valuable: our capacity to endure, reflect, and grow. Aldous Huxley understood that when gratification becomes instant, the soul becomes impatient. The individual loses the ability to wait, to wonder, to sit with ambiguity. And without those capacities, true learning and transformation become impossible. The brain adapts to speed. When everything is immediate, slowness feels like suffering. We become addicted not to pleasure itself, but to the speed of pleasure. Dopamine spikes become the new compass, and anything that doesn't trigger instant reward is labeled boring or irrelevant. This rewiring creates emotional fragility. People lose tolerance for discomfort, uncertainty, or delayed result. Patience, once a virtue, is now a liability in a world ruled by stimulation. And as patience dies, so does resilience. In this psychological environment, attention span collapses. Reading a book becomes unbearable. Deep conversation becomes taxing. Silence becomes threatening. We are always chasing the next hit, the next like, the next scroll, unknowingly eroding our ability to think deeply. But the consequences run deeper. Instant gratification damages not just attention, but identity. When you live in reaction to impulses, you never develop the self. You remain fragmented, pulled in 1,000 directions by external triggers. Huxley foresaw this fragmentation. He saw how people would stop seeking meaning and start seeking sensation. They would stop asking why and start asking how fast. But a life built on speed is hollow. It lacks narrative, depth, and coherence. Relationships suffer too. The culture of instant pleasure makes intimacy shallow. We expect connection without effort, understanding without time, and loyalty without presence. But love does not bloom in speed. It grows in slowness, in presence, in shared stillness. We also begin to fear the inner world. Every pause, every quiet moment becomes unbearable. Why? Because silence confronts us with ourselves. And most people don't know who they are without the noise. This fear drives an endless loop of consumption. We feed ourselves with content, food, images, distractions, not to nourish but to avoid. Avoid what? The mirror, the void, the questions that only arise in silence. And so anxiety rises, depression deepens, not because life has worsened, but because the soul has been deprived of its natural rhythm. Instant pleasure overstimulates but never satisfies. It excites but never fulfills. It keeps us moving but never arriving. This leads to spiritual disconnection. The sacred has its own pace, slow, quiet, mysterious. But in a world of instant gratification, mystery becomes intolerable. We want answers now, miracles now, results now. And in this rush, the divine slips away. Self-development becomes commodified. Meditations are marketed as quick hacks. Wisdom becomes bite-sized quote. Even spirituality is sold in dopamine-friendly packaging. But true transformation cannot be rushed. It requires friction, time, and stillness. The psyche withers when it's fed only speed. Creativity declines. Imagination dries out. Reflection vanishes. Life becomes mechanical, repetitive, automated. We may be stimulated, but we are not alive. To heal, we must relearn how to wait, how to sit in discomfort, how to feel without fleeing, how to be without achieving. Only then can we restore the depth that instant gratification has stolen from us. Huxley's critique was never about pleasure itself, but about our relationship to it. He saw how the structure of society would train us to seek quick relief instead of lasting joy, novelty instead of depth, and distraction instead of purpose. The price of instant gratification is nothing less than the death of the inner self. A death so slow, so silent, that most never realize it has happened. They simply feel a vague emptiness, a subtle restlessness, and call it normal. But it is not normal. It is a symptom of a system designed to produce docile consumers, not awakened souls. A system that thrives on your constant craving, because a craving mind is a controllable mind. The cure is not deprivation, but reconnection, with time, with stillness, with inner rhythm, with the real. And in that reconnection, we begin to reclaim our full psychological presence, the space where meaning is born. Topic 4. The spiritual cost, numbness, emptiness, and identity loss. Beyond the psychological decay lies a deeper loss, the spiritual one. A soul that is constantly sedated by pleasure slowly loses its ability to feel. Not just pain, but also awe, reverence, sacredness. And without that, we drift through life hollow, disconnected, lost in a fog of artificial emotion. Huxley understood that spiritual numbness is the most dangerous form of control, because a person who no longer feels the sacred cannot rebel, cannot dream, cannot transcend. They may survive, but they no longer live. Pleasure, when detached from depth, becomes a spiritual anesthetic. It numbs not only suffering but also joy. It makes everything feel soft, bland, indistinct. Like eating sugar all day, you stop tasting real flavor. Your soul becomes desensitized. In a world built on constant stimulation, the spiritual dimension is flattened. Mysticism becomes a brand. Rituals become trends. Sacred symbols are reduced to aesthetic prop. The divine becomes background noise in a carnival of distraction. But the soul speaks in whispers, not shouts. It emerges in silence, solitude, and sincerity, none of which survive in a pleasure-obsessed culture. And so, the modern individual loses access to the inner sanctuary, the only place where meaning can truly be found. This loss creates a deep existential emptiness, a sense of disconnection from life, from others, from self. People chase pleasure, but feel nothing. They accumulate experiences, but never integrate them. They are surrounded by light, but consumed by darkness. Identity also erodes in this environment. When your self-worth is based on how much pleasure you can consume or display, your essence becomes performative. You live for validation, not truth. For applause, not authenticity. You wear masks without knowing. You smile without feeling. You express without connecting. And in time, you forget who you are beneath the mask. You forget what it means to be whole. Spirituality becomes entertainment. Not a path, but a playlist. Not a sacred journey, but a trendy escape. The soul becomes a brand identity, marketed for likes, filtered for approval, commodified by algorithms. But true spirituality is not pleasing, it is purifying. It burns illusions. It confronts shadows. It demands silence, humility, and sacrifice. It is not always comfortable, but it is always real. This is the cost modern culture hides from us. The loss of sacred pain, sacred effort, sacred presence. We are told to avoid suffering at all costs, but in doing so, we also avoid transformation. Without suffering, there is no initiation. Without discomfort, there is no transcendence. The soul awakens through contrast, not constant sedation. But modern pleasure dulls every contrast until life becomes a monotone blur. The sacred becomes a distant memory, a myth of ancient times, and yet the hunger remains. A hunger for something real, something eternal, something untouchable by trends or technology. That hunger is the soul's last cry before total numbness. We must honor that cry. We must protect our capacity to feel, to wonder, to suffer meaningfully. That is the true rebellion in a pleasure-driven world. To feel deeply, to live fully, to walk a path that isn't designed by algorithms. Huxley wasn't a pessimist, he was a prophet. He saw that the future wouldn't destroy us with violence, but with comfort. That we wouldn't be enslaved by force, but by pleasure. That we wouldn't lose our souls by accident, but by choice. But we can choose differently. We can turn off the noise. We can sit in the silence. We can honor the soul's rhythm over the culture's speed. And in that choice, we begin to remember who we are. We are not consumers of pleasure, we are seekers of meaning. Not performers of identity, but carriers of soul. Not sedated bodies, but awakened spirits. And that remembrance is where the healing begins. Topic 5. Escaping the pleasure machine, awakening conscious desire. Escaping the pleasure machine begins with awareness. Not radical rejection, but radical presence. It is not about becoming an ascetic or denying every joy in life, but about distinguishing between true desire and manufactured craving. Between what nourishes the soul and what numbs it. Conscious desire is not impulsive, it's intentional. It arises from a deep sense of inner alignment, not from the noise of advertising or the pull of social trends. And yet, most people have never been taught to differentiate between the two. They assume that what they want is truly theirs, when in reality, it's often just implanted programming. Huxley warned us about this hijacking of desire. He understood that if you control what people want, you don't need to control what they do. They will willingly pursue their own chains, believing they're chasing freedom. The pleasure machine thrives on this illusion. To awaken is not merely to see the machine, but to see yourself in it. To witness your own habits, impulses, and distractions. To question not only the world, but also your participation in it. What part of your daily routine is truly chosen, and what part is simply inherited or automated? This awareness creates a rupture, a discomfort, a friction between who you've been and who you could become. It's not an easy path. It requires courage to step out of the dopamine loop and sit in stillness long enough to hear your real voice. That voice is not loud. It is not trendy. It does not promise instant reward. But it speaks from depth, from memory, from intuition, from essence. And when you begin to hear it, the world changes. Not because it becomes easier, but because it becomes real. Rebuilding conscious desire means reconnecting with presence, slowing down your consumption, choosing fewer pleasures, but deeper ones, seeking experiences that awaken you, not sedate you, conversations that nourish you, not distract you. It also means learning to endure discomfort without immediately escaping into pleasure, to hold space for sadness, boredom, silence, confusion. These are not enemies, they are initiators. They prepare the soul for transformation. Every time you choose depth over speed, you weaken the grip of the pleasure machine. Every time you resist the impulse and stay with the feeling, you reclaim a piece of your soul. It is a slow process, but it is a sacred one. You also begin to see the sacred in the ordinary. Because when you no longer need intense stimulation, you begin to notice the subtle joys again. The silence between words, the taste of real food, the beauty of a moment not captured by a camera. This is the true wealth. the capacity to feel deeply, think clearly, and love consciously. A richness that cannot be bought or broadcasted, but only lived. It also redefines success, no longer measured by accumulation or entertainment, but by clarity, depth, and connection. The more conscious your desires, the more meaningful your actions, and the more powerful your life becomes. But this path will isolate you. You will walk against the current. You will be misunderstood, even mocked, because in a world addicted to stimulation, stillness is threatening. In a world built on speed, presence is revolutionary. And yet, this solitude becomes a sanctuary. It is not loneliness, it is sovereignty. A sacred space where the soul can breathe again, dream again, remember its purpose. The awakened individual is not anti-pleasure. They are pro-presence. They no longer serve pleasure as a god, but choose it as a guest. They no longer chase highs, but cultivate harmony. They do not flee suffering, but walk through it with grace. This is what Huxley hoped for. Not a world without pleasure, but a world where pleasure serves the soul, not enslaves it. A world where humans remember they are not just bodies, but also consciousness, spirit, fire. We reclaim our humanity not by rejecting pleasure, but by transcending addiction. Not by living less, but by living more fully, more honestly, more intentionally. The machine loses power when you stop feeding it unconsciously. When you no longer let it dictate your emotions, your values, your identity. And in that moment, you become free. Not free in the way modern culture defines it, but free in the ancient, sacred, sovereign sense. Free to choose your path. Free to know your soul. Free to build a life rooted in meaning, not manipulation. This is not the easy path, but it is the only one that leads to wholeness, to awakening, to joy that does not fade, to love that does not depend on noise, to life that no longer belongs to the machine, but to you. Reclaiming the soul beyond pleasure. The modern world wants you distracted, entertained, and comfortably numb. But the true essence of life was never meant to be lived under sedation. As Aldous Huxley warned, the greatest threat is not external oppression, it's internal surrender. And in a culture where pleasure is abundant but meaning is scarce, awakening becomes the most radical act of all. You were not born to chase endless stimulation. You were born to feel deeply, to think freely, to live intentionally. When you begin to observe your desires with awareness and reclaim your inner stillness, you no longer belong to the machine, you belong to yourself. That is where the real freedom begins. That is where the soul rises again. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps us reach others who are also seeking truth in a world of illusions. Share your thoughts in the comments. What pleasures are you reclaiming consciously now? And remember, your attention is sacred. Guard it wisely.